Hey guys, we want to welcome you back to Real Talk with J&J. Today we want to talk about something that's really important to us, something that we have placed in our life and we feel like you guys should do as well.
It's boundaries. I'm going to give a story here. When I was in college, I said yes to everything. Like I literally wouldn't say no to anything. If someone was like, hey, do you want to be a part of intramurals? I was like, yes. Do you want to be part of speech club? Yes. Do you want to be part of this academic group? Yes. Do you want to work a part-time job or 25 hours a week? Yes. Do you want to do all these things? Like, do you want to go to this party? You want to I literally would not say no, to the point that I was so overwhelmed. I was literally just like, oh my gosh, like I hate how busy I am. I hate how frustrated I feel all the time. And I hate that people are always setting my agenda for me. People are always putting things on my calendar and I just keep saying yes. And I keep ending up in a point where I feel like my life is not my own anymore. I feel like other people have taken control and I just basically do whatever they say. And the reason I felt that way was because I did not learn and I did not start setting healthy boundaries for myself.
Let's go ahead and give a basic definition of what boundaries is. Boundaries is a line that marks the limit of an area, a dividing line. And let's go even deeper with this, right? That was just a practical.
That is like literally if I want to go outside and create a boundary, that's the definition there.
Let's talk about personal boundaries. What is the definition of personal boundaries? Personal boundaries are guidelines, rules, or limits that a person creates to identify reasonable, safe, and permissible ways for other people to behave towards them and how they will respond when someone passes those limits. That is really, really good.
Yeah.
And moving forward, of course, we have 3 points. We can't do anything else than 3 points, right? And so the first point is life without boundaries, what that looks like. The second point is establishing boundaries. How do we do that? And the third one is life with boundaries. How can we do that? How can we establish that?
Yeah. So for our first point, we can kind of go back to that story and think of myself in that situation. And a lot of people are in that situation where you don't have any boundaries in place of what it's appropriate for people to say to you, whether it's appropriate for people to call on you. You don't say no when you should be able to. You feel pressured because you haven't been strong in communicating your boundaries to others. And so what happens is you actually put yourself in disadvantaged situations because you haven't sometimes you have to have a little bit of backbone and say, you know what? No, this is a boundary. And when you cross this boundary, like the definition that Jasmine just gave, this is how I'm going to respond. And if you are consistent with that, that'll help you create a life that you are able to do yourself. But going into more different situations, like having no boundaries,
it'll allow other people to dictate your life. Yeah. It's not wrong to say no. Like Joshua said, you have to have a little backbone in yourself. Just say no to certain situations, especially if you really personally believe something and you don't want to do it. Don't allow someone else to pressure you to do something you don't want to do.
Yeah, and it can allow your schedule to get filled up. Which when your schedule's full, you don't have time necessarily to do the things that bring you life. Yeah. If you don't have boundaries, people will find time to fill up your schedule. They'll bring their emotional damage, their emotional stress. They'll throw their stress onto you. And if you aren't able to say, hey, wait, that's not a conversation that you need to have with me. Hey, actually, this is not something that I need to be dealing with right now. This is not a problem that I need to be putting on my plate. If you don't do that, you kind of end up taking on those boundaries. Yeah. You end up feeling that guilt. You end up feeling that stress. And then your life is a lot more frustrating. Plus, you now have less time to do things that actually bring you life.
Yeah. And going with that is like not having set boundaries can take away from your individual personality. Like we said before, like someone else can pressure you to do things that you do not want to do, or you don't personally believe, or things that are in the status quo, but you're like, nah, that's not me. But if someone can pressure you or easily convince you to do something, like that's taken away from you and what you believe.
And this can be in relationships as well. If hey, what you're doing is not something that I'm comfortable with, and being able to speak that up and having someone else who also respects boundaries. If you don't have boundaries, other people can't respect your boundaries. And people that do not respect your boundaries will tend to take advantage of that because they know, hey, I can get away with things here with this person because they don't have a boundary, and there's not going to be a consequence if I do something that they might not necessarily feel good about. And that's unfortunate. And it starts with us being, hey, I'm going to be aware of what boundaries are in place, and then holding not only myself, but others accountable. If someone crosses a boundary consistently, that is an indication that, wait, I don't know if this person is someone that needs to be in my life. I don't know if this person is someone that I need to have around me, because they cannot respect the boundaries that I've set for myself. And like, that's really important, that we respect others people's boundaries. We have our own, and then we make sure that people respect our boundaries.
And I like the point that we have right here. It's like mind, body, and spirit are all impacted by the boundaries that we set. And that's really important. Like we said, we want to set boundaries, like what makes us happy, what drives us. And then we also want to look at our, like, what is the opposite? What doesn't make us happy? What makes us don't have peace? What makes us have anxiety, and all those different things? And we want to go ahead and meet in the middle of, like, okay, set that line of, okay, this makes me have joy. This makes me have peace. This makes me have happiness. And this side right here is the opposite. So let's create a boundary and express that to different people and allow them to know, hey, this is something that we can't cross.
And I think also an advantage of having a boundary is it does allow other people to realize, is this someone, like, are we compatible? Let's talk about a relationship where there's no boundaries. Sometimes you have all these lovey-govey feelings or whatever, and you get with somebody, but then over time you start to notice that there's things that they do that annoy you, or things you would do that annoy them. And some of those are non-negotiables. Maybe it's your political views, whether it's your religion, maybe it's whether you're an indoor or outdoor person. Maybe you like to sit on the couch and watch Netflix, and they want to go outside and do something like that. And these are things that, you kind of have to, if you don't have boundaries, they're going to rub you the wrong way, and they can cause fights that could have been avoided if you had the boundaries to say, hey, here's what I'm okay with. Here's what I'm not okay with. Here's how I want my life to be. And sometimes if you have that conversation sooner rather than later, if that person isn't for you, they'll walk out of the situation, and you now have that freedom to find who you need to be with.
And then also, you allow your time to be devalued when you let others set your agendas for your life. So again, if you are allowing people to pressure you allowing people to walk over you during your time or during any area of your life, you're putting your ball in their court. You're allowing them to dictate everything that they need or that they want.
And if you give people that power, they will use it.
They have no remorse.
Yeah. Like the world's a cold place sometimes, but people will notice someone that, hey, they don't have boundaries. And I think of an example of when I was in school and you're in a group project. And if you don't have the boundaries to say, you know what, we're all going to be accountable to do our part of the work. We're all going to be this. And if we don't do this, we're going to talk to the professor, or we're going to talk to the teacher or whatever. And we're going to make sure that we're all accountable. I'm not going to do something, but a lot of times when I was in school, I cared about the grade. And I also didn't want to be that person that was like, oh, I don't want to tattle on people. I don't want to do that. Yeah. And so I'd be like, you know what, I'm just going to do all of the work. And then what really annoyed me is when I would do a lot of the work, and then they would also take credit for what I had done, knowing full well they did nothing. And they were like, no, we had a great team. We went out there and killed that presentation. Like, our paper was great. The professor loved it. And I'm over here like, wow, I did all the work. I didn't want to tattle because I didn't want to be that person. And I was okay with, like, that was more important that they liked me than me. And I spent hours doing extra work that I could have avoided had I had the voice to say, you know what? No, here's what we're supposed to be doing. Here's the boundary that was set, and here's the consequences if that boundary is crossed. Sometimes people will be annoyed, but it usually means they're in the wrong. When people are annoyed by your boundaries, that kind of is almost a character flaw on their part that they need to figure out. Like, that's them issue, not a you issue. Like, obviously you want to be reasonable in the boundaries that you set. Like, you can't just be like going to work one day and be like, you know what, my boundary is that I'm only going to work for 2 hours a day and you're going to pay me the full salary. Like, no, they're like, no,
that's not realistic.
Like, no, you're not working here anymore. But it can be, you've negotiated with me to work 40 hours a week. And I'm supposed to get paid this rate. If I work over that, I want overtime. Oh, I want work-life balance, and talking and communicating with your employer that, hey, this is a at-will employment for both of us. And if you're not willing to care about my mental health, if you're not willing to allow me actual time off, if you're not willing to work with my my schedule, what is the incentive for me to work a whole bunch of extra hours when that's not a fair exchange? If we're contracted for 40 hours a week at this rate, then that's what I'm going to do. And I will be flexible to work extra and things like that if you're also flexible the other way. So obviously boundaries within reason, but if people continually cross those boundaries, it says a lot more about them.
Yeah. And so going to our next point, how do we establish boundaries? I believe I shared this a while back, but we need to take inventory of what brings us life, what brings us joy, what brings us peace, and then also identify what's the opposite, what doesn't bring these things to you. And then we need to have a personal belief of this is how my life should be exhibited. And this brings joy. This brings peace. This brings life to my life.
Yeah, we have friends, and I'm not sure like they're the ones that coined this, but they always tell us that at the end of every day, they sit down and they say, what was life giving and what was life draining? And if things are continually life draining, that's where you know maybe there's a boundary that needs to be set there. If things are life giving, that's something that you want included in your life. And if something is life draining, there are things that are necessary that are sometimes going to drain life out of you, and you need to be refreshed. It's you have to eat your vegetables too sometimes. But there are sometimes things that are in your life that are draining your energy that don't need to be there. And that's where you have to know what those are and then be able to establish that boundary. Draw a line around both things. Draw a line around what is life giving and draw a line around what is life draining. And then kind of examine what things in this life draining could possibly be removed, or what things in this life draining are a result of me not having boundaries. Is it my boss asked me to work too much and I don't feel like I can say no because I feel like I'm powerless? Then that could be a cultural issue. That could be a work company issue. That could be a personal of you just not speaking up and them not understanding that you don't want to work like that. Like, again, we always say this, but like, unvoiced expectations always go unmet. I think sometimes we get super upset and we say, I want this and none of this is happening for me, but we never communicate that to the person who could actually do something about it.
Yeah.
And then we're mad that they don't do anything about it, but we haven't actually communicated it with them. If you need help with communication, episode 1, go back there, check it out. It's on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you can stream podcasts. And
also establishing these core beliefs allow for an easier time for us to set boundaries. It's easier for us to distinct of like, hey, this is going to be the line that can't be crossed. And this allows us to express and to share that with others, rather than if we, like Joshua said, if we had these expectations and we never share it or voice it to other people and don't share that, they are not going to know what line is crossed or what boundary that you have drawn in line.
Yeah. I mean, and I think it's like, let's make this practical. As a couple, we have to set boundaries with each other. What is okay for us to talk about in a, like, when we're in an argument,
a public setting.
Like what, like we don't want to ever be in a situation where we're uncovering one another in a public setting. We need to have boundaries of time. Like, hey, I know you're busy right now and I know I want to talk to you, and like, but understanding that my spouse is a priority. So if you're with somebody and your spouse needs you right away, I'm not going to get mad at her for needing me in a situation. I'm like, that is a boundary that we've set, that if you ever need me, I don't care where I'm at or what I'm doing, I'm going to make sure to respond to you because I'm giving you that place in my life. And if I am going to be busy, I'm going to communicate that with you. Those are boundaries that we've set. But also, we don't make plans without the other person knowing. That's a boundary that we don't add things to each other's schedule without talking about it first, because, we know what our schedule is, but sometimes you don't even necessarily need to have a reason that you don't want to go to lunch or go to dinner or something like that. Sometimes you just need a break. Sometimes you just need to reset. And if Jasmine books 7 dinner dates for us to go on and I'm not ready for that, it's going to naturally cause me to be a little bit annoyed of like, why am I doing all these things like this when I just need a break real quick? But if we talk about it and we're strategic, also then that can get you into a situation where you get in a fight and you end up canceling, and then you look worse because you're like, okay, we told these people we're going to go do something and then we're not coming through. Yeah. I would rather come through when I'm ready than to say yes to all these things and never show up. And again, that goes back to character, but it's so important that we have boundaries within our relationship of things that we are, if those are crossed, we have the opportunity to voice, hey, this is a boundary that we have and you crossed it here. And this is something that I want to talk about. It now creates an atmosphere where it's a lot easier to address the problem because the boundary has been set. Whereas if we don't have any boundary, if we've never talked about this and she does something like that, I might still get annoyed, but there's nothing for her to be accountable to because I haven't communicated a boundary.
I think this is a really important question that you need to ask yourself is how vulnerable you are with people. Not everyone is entitled to all of you. I think that's really key because with me, especially, like I love to be personable with everyone. I feel like everyone needs to know who I am. And so they get a piece of me with every conversation that I have with that person. That's just me. That's how I want to be known is I want to be real with people. I want to leave an impression on someone. And what's hard about that is sometimes I can give all of me to someone who doesn't need to know all of me.
Or it can happen where you continually say yes. Like maybe it's someone that just wants to meet with you all the time or someone that wants to talk all the time and you don't have the bandwidth or the emotional capacity for that. Or there's something else that's pressing and they don't understand that, wait a second, I'm going to keep pestering them. And you're like, hey, like, that's fine. Like, I just need a second. And they don't react that well.
Yeah.
That can kind of be like, not every single person in your life needs to know every deep, dark detail about your life. Not everyone needs to like, I think sometimes we feel like we have to justify every decision to every single person when that's not true. That's part of setting boundaries. It's like, hey, I can't do it Friday night. And sometimes we're like, oh, I can't do it Friday night because of this, this, and this, and this.
And like, really, we don't need that explanation. We don't need to share why we can't do this. It's just like,
it's just sorry, like, get your yes be yes and your no be no. Like when people need to know that, hey, when I say yes to doing something with you, I'm going to be there. But if I say no, like that's the end of the story. Or just like, hey, I have something, or hey, we talked about it, we can't do it. Being like, I think sometimes we feel entitled to give other people all of our time and attention. And when we're with people, yes, let's be intentional, but it is not also like, we don't want to, if people are taking up too much of our time to the point that it's causing a negative effect on us, we have to be able to push back and say, you know what, I just can't tonight.
Yeah.
Or I just can't right now. And
that's healthy. That's okay. It's not wrong.
And even in our relationship, even as a married couple, there's some times when Jasmine or we're just, it's been a hard day. We're very tired and maybe there's a big thing that we need to discuss and we'll communicate to each other. Right now, I just need
I don't
to
have
rest.
Physical capacity to go through this conversation.
Let's table this conversation and like, can we talk about it at this time? Whether it's in a couple hours, whether it's the next day. And then that's something that we built with each other to say, you know what? Okay, I understand. Like, I want you to be available. Now, it is important, obviously, in that situation to actually come through the next day. Otherwise, you keep pushing things down the road. But that's an okay boundary. If Jasmine is feeling like she needs a break, then I need to be able to respect that boundary.
And so what are practical boundaries that we need to set? There's boundaries for conversations. There's physical boundaries. There's time boundaries. There's boundaries that come up with work communication, personal communication. How can we establish those different things?
And you don't necessarily need to have all the answers right away, but you do need to start asking questions. What are my boundaries for a conversation with somebody? What am I willing to take on? What are my physical boundaries? Like,
and just like we were talking about, like in our communication podcast, there's time, place, and context. I feel like with a lot of these points right here, that's same thing: time, place, and context of like physical boundaries, conversation of work and personal.
Political views. Maybe there's sometimes you don't need to bring that up. Maybe there's certain people that you need to avoid because they, take a lot of energy out of you when you have that conversation with them. Physical boundaries at work. Like, are you someone that's okay with being touched on, like on the shoulder? Or are you not? Like, you need to communicate that. Are you someone, like in a relationship where like, maybe you're not a PDA person. Maybe you are a PDA person. Maybe like, I want you to hold my hand when we're out there. Like, what are my boundaries? What am I expecting? What is my expectation with time? Do I want you to just show up at my door and say, I am ready to hang out? Or do I want you to schedule ahead of time? Am I someone that wants to be planned out weeks in advance, or do I like a last minute thing? Those are things that you need to decide what your boundaries are and help to communicate those to others. Work, school, obviously there's things, if you communicate what your boundaries are at work, hey, like I need to be out this certain day because this is important to me and I have a family thing. or, hey, I'm not going to be here at this time. I'm going to make sure my work is still done. I'm still going to make sure I am fulfilling my end of the bargain, but I'm also going to ask that you also respect this. And if we communicate that, and if we come through with our word on the back end, people should also be held accountable to come through with their word for us.
Oh, for sure. And that allows us to control our schedule better. And it helps us establish all those boundaries by communicating those boundaries. And not only that, like, not only do we have to communicate those, like, educate people with those boundaries. Cause I know a lot of times, like, people don't really know of, like, oh, why are we setting this boundary? Like, why can't I show up to your house unannounced? Why can't I do this? And people just are unaware of those things. And you're like, hey, like, it's okay. Let me educate you. We're a married couple. You can't just show up unannounced all the time.
Yeah. Another thing is, there are healthy boundaries and there are unhealthy boundaries. We need to be very introspective and understand, okay, what boundaries am I setting that are healthy? And what boundaries am I setting that are unhealthy?
Yeah.
And if we are setting boundaries that are unhealthy, i.e., what's an unhealthy boundary? How about I'm not going to communicate with my spouse because I'm mad at them? That might be a boundary that I set, but that's not a healthy boundary. How about when someone makes me upset, instead of learning to forgive them and talk it out, I'm just going to go gossip about them? How about when I am supposed to be working out, I'm going to just watch Netflix instead? I'm not going to I'm just going to do what I feel like instead of doing what I'm supposed to do. There are unhealthy boundaries that we can put where we're like, you know what, I'm going to do this in a certain situation. And that's a boundary that we set, but it's not actually healthy for us. And then healthy boundaries are, sometimes we need to be pushed in a healthy way. Sometimes we need to be held accountable beyond what we normally would have been held accountable for. And so it's really important that we're intentional about these conversations, and that we understand, okay, what are the boundaries I'm setting? Are those healthy for me? And then that we communicate. We really have to make sure we communicate to others.
That's key.
And then we have to make sure that they're held accountable. If someone crosses a boundary, you need to be able to communicate that to them. And they need to be able to receive it well. That's what a real friend is. If a friend can't understand, or if someone can't understand that, oh, you have a boundary, I mean, obviously there could be a situation where it's an unhealthy boundary and they can work through that, but they should still respect you as you're going through that process to learn, to grow. It's really important that if people cross your physical boundary, if people are asking too much of you, if people are doing things that are taking life draining away from you, and you've communicated that to them, that you have an action that's, hey, if you do this, this is what the action is going to be. And that's me taking care of myself.
For sure. And the next step is life with boundaries.
Point number 3, here we go.
Life with boundaries. What does that look like? Once we have established and communicated our boundaries, this helps us have confidence and keep others accountable to our boundaries. Like Joshua said. So one boundary that we had and we started from dating is like, hey, Friday nights are our date nights. That's something that we will not give up. I mean, of course, some things come announced or whatever. But we are in agreement together of like, okay.
At least once a week, we make sure we have our uninterrupted time.
Yeah. But like we said, we've shared that with people. We've shared that with our friends, with our family, and they accepted that. They know like Friday nights are our date nights. If they ask us like, hey, can you come out? I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, but this is our date night, and they accept it. They love it. They're for it. And that's just something that we have done already. And people love it.
And when you have boundaries, then your personality is allowed to come through. You're allowed to set your own schedule. You're allowed to communicate your true self because your boundaries are in place for protection, but then you're able to operate in the life that you would like to have. You see more joy and peace in your life because things that aren't bringing peace and joy, you are able to remove from your life without feeling an obligation to somebody else because your boundaries are there. And then if people are not respecting your boundaries,
bye.
You're able to move on. You're able to say, you know what? If you're not able to respect these boundaries, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to move on. And that sometimes feel like, oh, that's so rude. That's so awful. But no, like part of growing is recognizing when people are draining you and they're not respecting your boundaries. And if they aren't respecting your boundaries, that's not necessarily someone that you need to have in your life, and you need to communicate that. And like, obviously there's moments for reconciliation and to grow and maybe they change their ways and things like that. But for the most part, how people act is how they are. Exactly. And if you see that people are continually pushing your boundaries or doing things that like put you in compromising situations, that might be someone that you need to remove out of your life for a little bit.
And you know what's key too is balance. That's very important. And there's going to be some situations that are harder than others that, like I said, there's going to be some times that for our date nights that it's going to happen and we're going to be like, okay, we're coming into agreement of like, okay, we're going to do this thing instead of date night, but we're going to go ahead and do date night instead of Friday night. We'll do it Saturday night. There's situations that come up that
you need to be able,
with,
you need to be able to adjust. But for the most part, you should be able to stay like steadfast to your boundaries.
For sure.
Like I always think in our life that we want to be, there's a verse in Philippians, and it talks about whatever is true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, or praiseworthy, or excellent, think on these things. If there's people or if there's situations that don't cause us to live that out, that's where we think about setting a boundary. And that brings so much joy and peace for our life because we're able to put ourselves in situations that help us grow to our potential, that help us get to where we want to be. And then we are able to eliminate things that don't line up with that. And when we do that together, we have that teammate there. It helps our lives be more full of joy, like we've been talking about. And this helps in our relationship. This helps get rid of so many fights because we are both proactive in establishing boundaries.
And like we said, like it's really important that we communicate it. Like I know a lot of times, like especially this is almost year 2 in our marriage, and I feel like as we progress and we dive deeper into our marriage, like there's some boundaries that come up and we discuss and like, hey, you know what, this has changed. Let's move this to this certain thing. And like we said, we're humans, we evolve. So it's really important once boundaries change, you express it and you share it with others too, because they are, like we said, unexpected, unvoiced expectations go unmet.
And when you establish boundaries, it's a lot easier to take on new situations, to take on a new job, to take on a new hobby, or things like that, because you have boundaries in place and you're not able to look at that situation through the lens of your boundaries and say, hey, is this something that I can fit in here? Is this something that aligns with my goals? Is this something that aligns with my peace? Is this something that is still going to help me live the life that I want? And if not, it's a lot easier to say no. It's a lot easier to move on. It's a lot easier to adjust. Now, boundaries do go both ways. Obviously, like I work at a great company, and I am there when I'm supposed to be there. And I work hard while I'm there. But then I also have that same expectation that when I'm not there, that they're going to respect my boundaries. And that goes both ways. Like if I say I'm going to be there at a certain time, though, I should be there, right? It can't just be like, oh, my boundary today is that I'm not going to come in. It's like, no, like be accountable to the boundaries that you also have set. When if you're like, hey, I'm fine with you scheduling something with me 2 weeks out. And they schedule something with you 2 weeks out. And then you're like, oh, actually, no, I don't want to do that anymore. Because then it's like, it's very inconsistent. And it kind of, again, back to character, it kind of sets you up as someone who's not going to follow through with their word. You should be following through with your word still. But within that, you can also have great boundaries.
And I know we voiced a lot of setting boundaries and making sure you express your boundaries to others. But it's also important that you respect other people's boundaries.
Yeah.
It goes both ways. You can't go have this high expectation of you have to meet my boundary, you have to do this, but then you are running over the other person and not respecting theirs. Like that's not right.
Yeah, like you're just so focused on making sure that everything's perfect for you that you don't care if you hurt other people's feelings. You don't care if you don't listen to their boundaries. Like, no, my boundaries are the only thing that's important. I think that mutual respect is what we all need to learn. Life would be so much easier across the board if everybody had mutual respect. And a lot of times you're not going to see that. There's people that will not have that mutual respect. And again, that goes back to the point of maybe that's someone you need to remove from your life. But you know who you can start with is yourself. You can have mutual respect. You can set your boundaries and you can be respectful of other people's boundaries.
Exactly. And let's go ahead and just give a recap of what we just talked about with boundaries. Our first point was life without boundaries, that we need to set boundaries that help us in the long run. The second one was
establishing boundaries. And that when we establish boundaries, it allows us to live the life that we want to live. And again, speaking to that first point, like if we don't establish boundaries in the life without boundaries, it's hard. People can take advantage of our time. People can set the agenda for our life. But when we establish boundaries, we're not able to set the course for our life.
And also the last one was life with boundaries. And when we have boundaries, we see we see our life starting to flourish. We start establishing healthy boundaries. We start having healthy relationships in the workplace and relationships and just different aspects of our lives. It just helps us grow as people.
Yeah, like when we have healthy boundaries, we're able to react to situations that come into our life. And we're able to say, is this something that fits? Is this something that respects my boundaries? Is this something that is good for me? And if it is, then we can allow it in. And if it's not, we say, you know what, I'm not going to allow that in. And that we are the gatekeepers of our life. We're the gatekeepers of our time. And if we won't do that, and we can't really complain that we're not having peace about certain things when we're just letting people run all over us, when we're saying yes to everything. But if we are consistent about establishing boundaries, and how can you take this practically? Maybe there's something in your life right now, a situation, a person, or something that is just causing you so much stress. What boundary do you need to set? Think about it, pray about it, research about it, set the boundary, and then be consistent with it. Communicate the boundary and then be consistent with it. And if you will do that in multiple situations over your life, you will see that you're able to flourish, that you're able to have peace, and that you're able to, others will respect you because they'll know what your boundaries are.
Again, thank you so much for listening with Real Talk with J&J.
Yeah, make sure to follow us on social media. We got Instagram, like us on Facebook, like our page. Comment on these videos. We want to hear what you guys think. Share this with your friends. We're really excited for this opportunity, and I'm so glad you guys are supporting.
Love y'all.